The Bible tells us Adam lived for 930 years, and then he died. It is presented as a simple fact, the end of a long and tragic life. But what if his death was not an end? What if it was a final, terrifying revelation? What if, in his last moments, the first man was shown a truth so profound it was deliberately erased from our understanding of creation? A truth that changes everything we thought we knew about the Garden of Eden. For centuries, we have read the opening words of Genesis. The earth was formless and void. We accept it without question. But have you ever stopped to ask why? Why was it formless? Why was it void? The scriptures do not explain. They simply state a fact. But ancient texts, sources that have been forgotten by many, suggest this was not the beginning. It was the aftermath. What you are about to discover will challenge your understanding of God's first works. It suggests that Eden was not a peaceful garden on a brand new world, but a fortified sanctuary in a cosmos already scarred by a forgotten war. It reveals that creation was not an act of making something from nothing, but an act of divine reclamation, a restoration of order from a devastating chaos that existed before the first day. If you believe there are deeper truths hidden within the scriptures, waiting to be found, then you are in the right place. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the vision granted to Adam on his deathbed is a secret that has been kept for far too long. The silence of Genesis on this matter is deafening. We are told the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, but we are never told why. It is presented as a starting point, a blank canvas. But what if it was not a canvas, but the wreckage? The quiet aftermath of a cataclysm so profound, its details were intentionally omitted. Think about it. Why would a perfect creator begin with a ruin? The clues have been there all along, hidden in plain sight. In the book of Job, God himself challenges Job with a question that echoes through eternity. He asks, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Who were these sons of God? They were not men. Humanity did not yet exist. This verse confirms an audience to creation, a celestial host that existed long before the first day. This single passage shatters the traditional view. It suggests that when God said, "Let there be light," he was not speaking into a silent, empty void. He was speaking into a darkness populated by witnesses, and their shouts of joy, were they for a new beginning or for a long-awaited victory? The evidence points to something far more ancient. A history before history. A war before man. Ancient texts, including passages in Isaiah and Ezekiel, speak of a mighty celestial being who fell from grace, cast down from the heavens. We read these as allegories, but what if they are literal accounts? What if the formless and void earth was the direct result of this cosmic rebellion? This would mean Genesis chapter 1 is not the story of a peaceful creation, but the story of God reclaiming a world that had been plunged into chaos by a forgotten enemy. This is where the official story becomes silent, but other ancient records do not. In texts that have been preserved for millennia, outside the canonical Bible, the details emerge. One such text, known as the Life of Adam and Eve, contains a startling account. It speaks of a vision granted to Adam in his final hours on earth, a revelation not of the future, but of a past so ancient it predates time itself. What did Adam see? He was shown the world before the first day of creation. And it was not a peaceful, empty void. It was a battlefield. He saw a water-covered, ruined world, shrouded in a profound darkness that was the result of a cataclysmic, celestial war. He witnessed the wreckage of a former age, a rebellion that had plunged God's original creation into chaos and despair. This vision reframes the opening of Genesis entirely. The earth was formless and void, not because it was new, but because it had been destroyed. The darkness on the face of the deep was not simply the absence of light. It was the lingering shadow of a great evil that had been cast down. God's command, "Let there be light," was not just an act of creation, but an act of divine conquest over a pre-existing darkness. So why was this profound truth removed or omitted from our primary scriptures? The ancient sages who compiled these texts understood its power. A story of a pristine creation is simple, absolute, but a story of reclamation, of God restoring a world already scarred by war, raises difficult questions. It suggests that Eden was not just a garden, but a fortress, a divine foothold in a cosmos where a battle had already been waged and was far from over. This truth was not lost. It was hidden. This vision, passed down through traditions outside our common Bible, describes an order of creation that existed long before the 6 days we know. Before the earth was a water world, shrouded in darkness, it was a realm of light, inhabited by the firstborn of creation. These were the sons of God, who shouted for joy, the original stewards of a cosmos teeming with divine energy. They were not angels as we picture them, but beings of immense power and authority, tasked with overseeing God's perfect material universe. But within this perfect order a shadow grew, a rebellion, born of pride. The most powerful among these celestial beings sought not to serve creation but to seize it. This was not a quick, heavenly dispute. It was a cataclysmic war that raged across the cosmos. The resulting destruction was absolute. Stars were torn from their courses, and the original, light-filled earth was plunged into a violent, watery chaos. This is the true origin of the formless and void world. It was a ruin, the aftermath of a war so terrible its memory was almost completely erased. God's work in Genesis, then, was an act of divine restoration. He was not creating on a blank canvas, but on a scarred and broken one. When he said, "Let there be light," he was pushing back a literal, sentient darkness that had taken root. Each day of creation was a strategic move to reclaim territory from the chaos, to re-establish divine order where ruin had reigned. The world God prepared for Adam was a world reclaimed from the enemy. So why is this account absent from Genesis? Why the silence? The ancient sages who compiled the scriptures made a choice. They believed this truth was too complex, too terrifying. A story of God battling an ancient, pre-existing darkness could be misunderstood. It could weaken the perception of his absolute sovereignty. And so, for the sake of a simpler, more direct narrative of an all-powerful creator, the story of the celestial war was buried. The truth of the first ruin was hidden, leaving us with a beginning that was, in reality, the middle of a much older story. The version of creation we have learned since childhood is one of absolute power and pristine beginnings. God speaks, and a perfect world emerges from a silent, empty void. It is a story of magnificent simplicity, but the truth revealed in Adam's final vision is far more complex. It reframes creation not as an act of making, but as an act of reclaiming. It presents a creator not working on a blank canvas, but on a battlefield, restoring order to a world already scarred by a cosmic war. This raises a difficult question. If this account is so crucial, why was it hidden? The answer, according to ancient tradition, lies in a desire to protect. The early church fathers and rabbinic sages made a choice. They believed that the story of a God battling a pre-existing chaos could sow confusion and fear. A narrative of a creator making something from nothing was a message of ultimate, unquestionable power. They feared that revealing the full story of the celestial rebellion would introduce an adversary so ancient and powerful it might weaken the faith of the common person. And so, through councils and quiet decisions over centuries, certain texts were set aside. Books that elaborated on the world before Genesis, on the nature of the sons of God, and on the cataclysm that left the earth formless and void, were deemed apocryphal. They were not always called false, but they were labeled dangerous, too profound for the uninitiated. In an effort to preserve a simple, unshakable faith, These spiritual leaders effectively buried the first chapter of cosmic history. The result is that the story we read in Genesis begins in the middle of a much larger conflict. The serpent's appearance in Eden seems sudden, his motives unexplained. But when viewed through the lens of the suppressed texts, it all makes sense. The conflict in the garden was not the beginning of the war between good and evil. It was simply the next great battle in a war that began in an age before time, in a darkness that existed long before God said, "Let there be light." This forgotten history changes everything. It means God's plan for humanity was not simply a reaction to a single act of disobedience in a garden. It was a strategic, decisive move in a war that began before the foundations of the world. Your salvation, your faith, is not just about correcting Adam's fall. It is about participating in the final victory of a conflict that spans eternity. The story of Jesus Christ is not just the redemption of man. It is the ultimate reclamation of a cosmos that was once lost to darkness. This truth was hidden for a reason. It was deemed too heavy, too complex for those content with a faith that asks no difficult questions. But you are still watching, because you are not one of them. You have felt that there is more to the story, a depth that has been smoothed over and forgotten. This knowledge finds those who are ready to receive it. It is for the believer who seeks not comfort in simplicity, but strength in the full, unvarnished truth of God's majestic and ongoing battle against the forces of chaos. Have you ever wondered why faith can sometimes feel like a struggle? Why the world seems locked in a relentless spiritual conflict? It is because the simple story we were told left out the first, most violent chapter. The modern church often speaks of peace and prosperity, but it hesitates to speak of war. This ancient context explains the intensity of the darkness we face. It reveals that we are not just living in a fallen world. We are living on a reclaimed battlefield, where the enemy has not yet conceded his defeat. Understanding this does not weaken faith. It forges it into steel. It transforms your view of Scripture from a collection of stories into a unified cosmic war manual. Every prophecy, every miracle, and every promise is a testament to a God who did not abandon his creation to ruin, but stepped into the darkness to reclaim it, piece by piece. The Garden of Eden was the first fortress of light in a reclaimed world, and the story of what happened there is far more significant than you have ever been told. But this raises an even deeper question. If the 6 days of Genesis were an act of restoration, what exactly was God restoring? Was he simply rebuilding a physical world? Or was he reclaiming something far more precious that was lost in the chaos? Ancient Jewish mysticism, in texts like the Zohar, speaks of an original, divine light that filled the cosmos before the material universe was formed. A light so powerful it was the very substance of the first creation. This was not the light of our sun or stars. It was the pure essence of God's glory, a spiritual energy from which the first beings, the sons of God, were formed. The original creation was not a world of rock and water, but a realm of light and consciousness. The celestial war did not just break a planet. It shattered this primordial light, plunging the universe into the spiritual darkness Adam witnessed in his vision. Eden, then, was not the first garden. It was an echo of a far greater, luminous garden that had been lost. This leads to a revelation that has been hidden from all but a few. When God said, "Let there be light," he was not creating something new. He was gathering the scattered fragments of that original, divine light. But was all of it recovered? The ancient texts suggest it was not. They hint that the most potent portion of this original light, the seed of the first creation, was hidden by God, concealed somewhere within the new physical world, protected from the forces of darkness. And here lies the most profound mystery of all. If this sacred primordial light was hidden on earth, where is it now? Could it be that the entire story of the Bible, from the patriarchs to the prophets, is the secret story of God guiding humanity to find and protect this hidden remnant of a lost creation? This suggests that the quest for God is not just a spiritual journey. It is a search for a tangible piece of a world that existed before time began. A light that, if found, could restore a glory we have never known. This changes our understanding of God Himself. For millennia, we have been taught to see Him as the Creator, the one who spoke a perfect world into existence from an empty void, and He is that. But this deeper truth reveals a more intimate, more powerful aspect of His nature. He is the divine restorer, the God who does not discard a broken creation, but steps directly into the chaos and wreckage to reclaim it. The story of the Bible is not just about creation and fall. From the very first verse, it is the story of redemption. And what, then, is our role in this cosmic story? If the celestial war was the first act, and the restoration of earth was the second, then the creation of humanity was the third. Adam was not simply a gardener. He was God's answer to a rebellion that shook the heavens. Where the mighty sons of God failed in their pride, God created a being from the dust of the reclaimed earth, humble yet made in His own image. Mankind was placed in Eden not just to enjoy paradise, but to be the faithful stewards of a world that the first stewards had tried to steal. Our very existence is a declaration of war against the ancient darkness. This knowledge does not destroy faith, it completes it. It does not contradict the scriptures you hold in your hands. It unlocks their deepest, most urgent meaning. Suddenly, the constant struggle described by the Apostle Paul, the spiritual warfare, the warnings against principalities and powers of darkness, it all makes perfect sense. It is not a metaphor. It is the literal state of a cosmos still reeling from a war that began before time, a war in which you are a soldier. This truth was not hidden to deceive you, but perhaps to protect a simpler faith. But for those who have always felt there was a deeper conflict raging just beneath the surface of our world, this is not a revelation that shatters belief. It is the key that finally makes the entire story cohere. It transforms faith from a passive belief into an active, courageous participation in God's eternal plan to fully and finally reclaim all of creation from the shadow of its first ruin. This cosmic history, hidden just beneath the surface of Genesis, reveals the most profound truth of all. The plan for your redemption was not a reaction to Adam's sin in the garden. It was the masterstroke, conceived in eternity, before the foundations of the reclaimed world were ever laid. The fall of the first celestial beings proved that no created steward, no matter how glorious, could guarantee victory. God knew that a second failure was not just a possibility, it was an inevitability in a world still shadowed by an ancient enemy. And He had already prepared the final answer. Suddenly, the book of Genesis is no longer just the story of a paradise lost. It is the story of a promise that could never be broken. The prophecy whispered in the garden of a descendant who would crush the serpent's head was not a hastily conceived remedy. It was the first public declaration of a divine strategy that predated creation itself. The entire Old Testament, with its laws, sacrifices, and prophets, transforms into a sacred map, pointing not just back to a lost Eden, but forward to the ultimate champion who would finally and forever win the ancient war. This is why the Apostle John speaks of Christ as the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. His sacrifice was never Plan B. It was the central, unmovable pillar of God's entire cosmic campaign. He is the true light of the world, the very substance of that original, divine glory made flesh, to enter the darkness and reclaim creation from within. He is the ultimate Son, demonstrating perfect obedience where the first sons of God chose rebellion. He did not come merely to save humanity. He came as the final warrior to win the war that began in the darkness before time. The story you have always known is true, but it was only a single chapter. The cross was not just an event in human history. It was the decisive, victorious blow in a conflict that spans eternity. Your faith is not a passive belief. It is your place in the triumphant army of the divine restorer. The vision given to Adam on his deathbed was not meant to inspire fear, but to reveal the breathtaking scale of God's magnificent, unstoppable plan. A plan that did not begin in a garden, but in the heart of God, before the world was ever formed. Take a moment and let this sink in. The story of your faith is grander, deeper, and more ancient than you were ever taught. The spiritual battles you face are not random struggles. They are echoes of a cosmic war in which you were chosen to be a victor. This knowledge was not meant to create fear, but to instill in you a profound sense of purpose. You were created for such a time as this, to stand firm in a history that began long before the garden. For centuries, these truths have remained in the shadows, preserved in texts and traditions that were set aside. They were considered too deep, too powerful for a simple faith. But we are living in a time of revelation. What was hidden is now being brought into the light, not to challenge your faith, but to complete it. God is calling His people to a deeper understanding, to arm them with the full story of His magnificent plan. If this truth burns in your heart, and you feel the weight of this ancient story settling into your spirit, let us know. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to activate the notification bell. You will not want to miss the revelations that are still to come, as we continue to uncover the secrets hidden within the Word. And now, we have a members area. By becoming a member, you bless this work and become a vital part of our mission to continue producing uplifting and revealing content like this. Finally, we want to know where this message is reaching. Please, take a moment to write in the comments the name of the city you are watching from. It is a blessing to see how far God's hidden truths are now traveling.